So before we start, Ronald, I just would like to tell all of our viewers that we got in touch a few years back, isn't it? Do you remember how we got in touch and what was the context in which we got in touch?
Yeah, so I think this was around the time when you started your channel. That's how I remember it. To be honest, at that point, I was also I was having a deeper conversion. Okay. So I had the same plan. I thought maybe I can do something. But I saw that you were doing, and I was happy, and I think I contacted you through WhatsApp. Yes.
And I asked you if you could add me to some WhatsApp group so I can share the Song on Fire videos, something of that sort. And then on and off we were in touch, but in the last 2 or 3 years we were not that much in touch because I had left all the WhatsApp groups. And then very recently we got in touch and we got to speaking, and that's how this interview is happening right now, isn't it? So just for the people, brief introduction about yourself. Where are you now and what are you doing?
I'm Cradle Catholic and I'm here in Muscat, Oman. So I have a small business here. So I have my wife, my 4 children, and my mother also with me. And I was raised as a devout I was raised in a devout Catholic home. We made frequent visits to retreat centers, pilgrimages. My father especially had a good devotion to Our Lady. I think that's important. As we move further, you'll see why.
So you said you were brought up in a devout Catholic family, but how was your formation? Like, did you grow up as a strong Catholic or it happened later on in your life?
I think I grew up as a strong Catholic, at least up until 20 years old or 21 years old. I think so. I was quite devout. I feel so. But I think at that time I was watching a lot of videos on Islam. For example, Dr. Ahmed Didat. So this gentleman was actually stumping a lot of Christians with his rhetoric. So I had fallen for that for quite some time. So I was trying to find answers. And for a brief time, I considered Islam. Yeah. And Protestantism as well. But I think I spent a lot of time investigating Islam than Protestantism.
So when did you become, so to say, radical when it came to, the Catholic faith? Like, in our today parlance, we say radical traditionalist. So how did that journey happen for you?
So it was in this context, what we left off, that is in the context of Islam. So I was trying to find answers, and there was this YouTube channel called Sensus Fidelium on YouTube. So this was, I think, 10 or 12 years ago. I'm not sure about this, but it has a huge database on various topics. So they had really good sermons. So I started listening to that. I still listen to it, and it's there. That was the starting point, I feel. So, but as I was listening, I moved on further into other more radical traditionalist types. There are other YouTube channels that you can find easily. So I started listening to them, I patronizing their materials. For example, one of them is SSPX. Most people won't agree that they are radical, but I think we can explore that topic later. I feel they are radical because the term radical means from the root. So I think the roots, they're planted elsewhere. It's what I found out. So I started patronizing their materials. It's quite expensive, but I bought all their materials up until 2021. I feel so. Their conferences and some of their speakers, I very closely followed them. One of them is John Salza. I closely followed him and bought their books. I read all of them. Yeah, this paradigm shift. I did not know that I was going into this. For a very long time, I was very comfortable with it. Yeah.
And when did the detransition, so as to, from the radical traditionalist, when did you actually started understanding the Catholic faith in its actual true form? How did that transition happen, or deconversion happen, I should say?
So here again, it's very difficult for me to pinpoint any one particular instance, but I think it was a gradual procedure. But but I think what happened is you have certain points when you're a traditionalist. For example, the traditionalists claim that there was this Protestant infiltration, Freemason infiltration within the church, especially during the time of Vatican II. So that was the point which actually got me in, because when I look at it externally, I felt like there is quite a bit of a change. So that was one point, and then there is a few other points they usually bring up. For example, there are a lot of people leaving the Catholic Church, leaving into Protestantism, because it's very much like Protestantism now at this point. So these things got me in, but those are the very points I started considering. But I found out, because I have not pursued this academically, theology or philosophy, but based on those points, what they had to say, I did. Those were the standards I used, and I found out they were guilty of those points. And I think we'll explore them.
Yeah. So you also explained an interesting episode with John Salsa, like how you were listening to his material, and when he left the Sedevacantism or SSPX, I'm not sure, then you also felt that provocation in your heart.
Yes, that was a parallel story. So before that, I think it's extremely important to know what exactly radical traditionalism is, or traditionalism in general, what it is. So if you don't mind, I'll just go over that, because otherwise it's very difficult to even trace the path of John Salza or me. So radical traditionalism, like I said, right from the root, it's planted elsewhere. Okay. We can go into that a little bit later on. But the groups that I think who are here, one is the Sedevacantists. So the Sedevacantists, the name itself, Sedevacantists, which means seat is vacant. They're talking about the seat of the Pope. So they think the seat is vacant for quite some time. There are different Sedevacantists. This is the basic, but they think the seat has been vacant, at least for the last 5 or 6 popes, or even beyond. There's extreme versions of that who think since the 11th century it has been vacant. And because of that, some of these councils after that is invalid. The Mass is invalid, the Novis Order is invalid, and things like that. And there is also SSPX, and they have further divisions, or something parallel to them. This was started by someone called Archbishop Lefebvre.
After the Vatican II Council.
Sorry?
No, after the Vatican II Council.
Yes, after the Vatican II Council, because this episode is actually, it's good you mentioned that, because everyone went into Vatican II Council thinking, this is, we have to reform some things. All the bishops went, including Archbishop Lefebvre, went into the council thinking we have to come up with some reforms. So everyone agreed there was some sort of issues around, we have to tackle these issues. So the reform, everyone went in, they all signed, including Archbishop Lefebvre, signed the documents. He came out, but later he contested some of the documents. And then in defiance, he went and consecrated 4 bishops, and I think there were 9 priests as well. So that is the beginning of SSPX. So he's the founder of SSPX, and they further split into some other groups. These are mainly the radical traditionalists.
So how does it connect dots with John Salsa and your leaving the radical traditionalist movement?
Correct. So John Salza, since I used to purchase their materials, especially the conferences which comes every year, John Salza was speaking for them in some of their conferences. In fact, one of the videos on Sensus Fidelium was of John Salza. It was on the great apostasy, which we have in the Bible. So he said, there is a faithful remnant. They are the ones who later, bring back the tradition or bring back the faith. So he told us, I think this video was 10 years ago. And then SSPX set up something in order to combat Sedevacantism.
So John Salsa was a Sedevacantist?
No, he was from SSPX. He was speaking for SSPX in their conference.
Okay.
So John Salsa set out to write this book under their publication. It's called Angelus Press. That's where I bought my materials. And he started writing. He wrote this really good book, which I read. I think it was slightly on the expensive side for India because I don't think it was published here. And so I wrote to him, asking, is there another edition coming, a revised edition? Because there are lots of arguments, and the Sedevacantists, they were pushing back on this. So he was updating few things. I was also reading from his website as well. So what happened is, as he wrote this book, and as I read the book as well, I felt some of the arguments, apply to SSPX as well. Okay, so John Salza, as I wrote this, he said, wait for some time. He might come up with, 2 volumes. Okay, and then I tried to write some letters, and he got busy for a while, or I don't know what happened, but he was silent for quite some time. And then I was just waiting for this, and all of a sudden I just heard, this interview that came on YouTube, and he was speaking against SSPX, and his testimony was something like this, something like what I experienced. At that time, I dismissed it because I thought maybe, I'm not good with logic. And so, I might have come to a wrong conclusion. So I just left it there. I suspended my judgment, to be honest. But I found out John Salsa had actually, was going against SSPX. He had some arguments, and he said when he wrote that book, if he was consistent, it also applied to SSPX.
So that's very interesting, right? So John Salsa started the journey to combat Sedevacantism, and as he was writing the book on behalf of SSPX, he found out the arguments that he was making against Sedevacantism also was applicable to SSPX, and eventually he left SSPX, and that kind of started your journey towards leaving the radical traditionalist movement. So I just want to go through some of the points which you made, which were very, very interesting during our pre-interview call. And it was kind of, eye-opening for me too, because I also don't have a great understanding of the radical traditionalist movement. And, you kind of gave a good purview into it. So the first thing that I want to discuss with you, Ronald, go ahead, sorry.
More important thing is, I just want to say, during this time in this movement, traditionalist movement, I was also in few WhatsApp groups, social platforms where I've been interacting with all sorts of traditionalist groups that I've just mentioned, SSPX. Most people don't know in India there are people who are considering Sedevacantism. Okay, and considering as in some of them have claimed that they are Sedevacantists. I have interacted with these people, and there's also SSPX and few other groups that have the mass going on in India. So I'm always interacting with these people. This is important, and this has been for nearly 4 or 5 years. I've had this interaction with them. At first friendly, later on, asking questions and things like that. I think that's important because the credential won't be there. That's why I just mentioned.
Sure. Thank you for that, Ronald. So the first point that I want to discuss with you is you beautifully mentioned how our Protestant brothers hold on to the sola scriptura doctrine, which they say Bible alone is the foundation for the moral and faith-based teaching of the Christian faith. Our radical traditionalist friends say tradition alone is the definition how Catholic faith needs to be practiced, and without making a demarcation between the capital T tradition and the small t traditional practices which the church has been doing, and the church has authority to change those things at any point in time. So can you explain how this kind of proved a vital point for you, the sola tradition?
Okay, so I'll just put it under this broader umbrella that Protestantism. So, for example, sola tradition is one of the things, because what they told me was that, we have had infiltration of Protestantism. Now, I'm not going to affirm or deny that. We don't need that for now, because what we're talking about here is, if they are blaming that on that side, I think we have to be clear on this side of any sort of Protestantism. So, because I'm just trying to see if this is a genuine place to be. So, the first thing that I found out is, just like Protestants, sola scriptura, where you don't have an authentic living voice to interpret the Bible. Okay, everyone interprets it for themselves. And so one of the common rhetoric against Protestantism is that you're fragmented. You have so many different voices. You don't agree between yourselves. Then how can you be assertive towards us? That's one of our common rhetoric. So in fact, some of the traditionalists use this. This is a very common rhetoric with traditionalists as well. So when it comes to tradition as well, how can you interpret just tradition devoid of the magisterium? And when I say magisterium, the current magisterium, because it's a living voice, right? Every century, every decade, this living voice interprets it to this, the faithful. So that immediately was a problem to me, because the same consequence that Protestants suffer, the traditionalists suffer, because this SSPX, which Archbishop Lefebvre started, they had further fragmentation. The priests, the bishops, they went away. They said, it's not traditional enough. They went ahead. Some of them became Sedevacantism from SSPX. Some of them started SSPX MC, Marian Corps. They are the ones operating in India. And they say they are more traditional, they are more faithful to the vision of Archbishop Lefebvre. And this is because there is no living voice, right? Everyone can interpret tradition in whatever manner they want. Yeah, that's one part of Protestantism. There's other very interesting, Protestantism that's within this closet Protestantism that is within tradition. If you're interested, I'll just briefly mention those as well.
Sure, absolutely. I want to.
Okay. So you want to hear? Okay. So this other part about Protestantism is at the time of Reformation. Okay. What they said is the real true faith of the early Christians. At the time of Constantine, the church was corrupted. Okay, the church was corrupted, and then few people, discreet people, they preserved this true faith. And at the time of Reformation, it came out. Okay, it was some sort of divine intervention. It came out. Now, I saw the parallel between this claim and the claims of Sedevacantism. Because what they are essentially claiming is, after Vatican II, or even SSPX for that matter, to a certain extent, that it was corrupted. There is a state of necessity. The tradition needs to be preserved somewhere else in these discrete number of people who are holding the true faith. Right? So you see that parallel in both cases. I think when this Reformation was happening, one of the things St. Francis de Sales, he wrote one of the best apologetics books called Catholic Controversy. That's another book that led me into this. In that he asked, so what you're saying is the entire Christendom failed, and you're saying our sacred Lord, he broke the ties with his bride, with his spouse, and he took for himself a younger spouse. So he asked that. So that just lit up everything for me. So that's the second one we had. And the church never, if you're saying we are Protestants, but it's not the case, they are being less traditional. The church has never considered, anyone who's having true faith as the true church. That's not the conception of what the church is with Catholicism.
I sometimes, when I have these discussions with our Protestant brothers and sisters, before they could ask, how do you know the Catholic Church is the one true church? I will, revert back and ask them, how do you know the church that you are part of is the one true church? Kind of the same argument that we can make with a lot of radical traditionalists who claim that they alone have the, the revelation of the truth and they are the protectors of the truth. It's kind of a little arrogant, right, Ronald, to think that, a small group of people have the ultimate truth and the church. Jesus has abandoned his bride, as you said, the church, and he's left everybody, to go astray.
That's where this despair started hitting me as well, because when I was in the traditionalist movement, this, what you have just mentioned, but when I asked my Sedevacantist friends, they were not, I said, now that I've come back, there is this peace, tranquility of order.
Yes.
So I asked my friend, he said he doesn't feel that when he returned to this, he still has some questions. Maybe this is different for them, but for me, there is a lot of peace at this moment.
Okay, moving on to the next point, Ronald, I want to talk to you about emotionalism, like how we see in our culture today, people who are woke, they don't want to have a logical conversation. Like they don't want to answer questions which are difficult. They just want to blindly hold on to something which they are attached to in an emotional level, and they don't want any logical conclusion or affirmation to that particular position that they are holding to. So you say that this was something very prevalent in the radical traditionalist movement. Can you explain a little more?
Mostly that was the case, but certainly there were some gentlemen and people who were they were looking into arguments, and they're having conversions as well. Some are still there, but they were not making emotion. But mostly I did find one of the best examples, the case in point is going to be that your comment section. Now even as we publish, we'll see what I say is correct or not. But once I started questioning this, there were regular ad hominems. That is, ad hominems, personal attacks. You put forth an argument, they don't speak about that. They say how less you're qualified, or something else that you did wrong. Okay, but the argument is
like your character rather than the point
yes.
that you're making.
So two names that I usually was labeled was Pope's Plainer and Loftening. That is Reason and Theology. So it's run by this Mr. Michael Lofton. So I was usually called that. So I try to bring them back to the arguments. It's been extremely difficult for me. That's one of this emotionalism thing. And then they have this concept of righteous anger, which is true. You need to have righteous anger according to Catholic, and so they're. So someone besides ad hominem and straw man, okay, one of the things that I was always told is, have you attended a TLM? You know how beautiful it is. First attend a TLM and then talk to me. These are the questions that I was told. And I just want to, one small incident that I wanted to say is, from SSPX there are these other groups, right? So there is one in India, in Bangalore, I think so. So I was interacting with one of the gentlemen from that who attends there. He was initially critical of this, but he went in there and now he's against SSPX. It's a difficult situation. So when I was countering him with some of these arguments, he told me, you know what, come talk to the priest. Why don't you talk to why are you talking? I said, you can answer these arguments because you've gone in there, right? So, and finally he told me something that really struck me. He said, have some humility and go and talk to the priest. I said, can he come on an online platform and I'll debate him? Can he do that? And he said, you have the humility, go talk to him. And then I made that call. But after I made that call, I told him something extremely important. It's not at all humility, because I am supposed to submit to the authorities that I have, right? That's the proper humility. You see how emotions, this is the passions that is in St. Thomas Aquinas. They are good slaves but bad masters, and you can see this here. Okay, if you have intellect leading your emotions, you wouldn't have come to this conclusion. This is humility. If you had proper humility, you wouldn't have gone there in the first place. The humility is supposed to be, submit to the authority that God has placed.
Actually, I also came across that particular situation, Ronald, when I was making this video about the charismatic renewal, gift of tongues and all. People used to say me, talk to this father. If that father says, then it should be, the ultimate truth. So when people are holding on to these attachments without, having the willingness to have a logical conversation, they just, pick and choose, people who can, support them, and they will say, you talk to this priest, then you tell me, the same kind of scenario that you had. So you made the right point. Our ultimate authority is the church, the Catholic Church. So the true humility is submitting to the actual authority, the legitimate authority, isn't it?
Yeah, illicit authority, yes. So that's one point that they totally miss, because this whole establishment is defying this authority and having their own authority. But the Bible is replete with people who have had different authorities. They chose their authorities, and things have ended up really bad for them. And that is why this is an interesting point. That is why, although illicit, it's not only illicit mass that they have, it's also sacrilegious. The mass that they have is also sacrilegious, because they are not the ones who were sent in the apostolic succession. You made, or they made themselves authority over you, and that is why it's sacrilegious. It's not even just illicit. Yeah.
And the third point is the famous point. Whenever you have an argument or a discussion with the rats, they immediately talk about the Novis Order and the traditional Latin Mass. So I want to talk a little bit on the liturgical point of view, like how you came to the greater understanding of why Novis Order is also a valid Mass and it is okay because the Church has said so. How did that come through for you, Ronald? Because I feel like how for Protestants, Mother Mary is one of the most difficult stumbling block to cross. I feel for the rats, it's TLM.
Even for me personally, this was very difficult. Although I grew up in the Novis Order, and I felt I've always had that grace, especially during my youth. Okay, but when I discovered TLM, and I still love TLM for its beauty and things like that, but there is something called attachment. Okay, and I will explain. They will say this is not attachment because it's a sacrifice, but I will explain that why it's an attachment. But for me, this was the last thing that even I had to tackle. What about Novis Order? Because sedevacantists claim it's invalid, not even illicit, it's invalid. But SSPX makes a more nuanced claim. They don't say it's illicit, they say it's harmful and dangerous. These are the exact words. But this is even more radical, because if it's at illicit, you could go into some detail, nitty gritty, and you have to prove. But this, they are saying something handed over by the church is harmful and dangerous. The means of salvation that the church is putting forward is harmful for its faithful. So that was very difficult for me. I couldn't, something was wrong there. So both sedevacantism and SSPX were claiming something else. So I went into the details. Now, if we go into the details, it's too much. But rather, I will tell you one principle that one verse that everyone knows: the gates of hell will not prevail against the church. Okay, we just need to look at that. Has the highest theological notes. Okay, that is, you have to give an assent of faith, even if your reason doesn't come up to that much. If you're not able to understand through your reason, you still have to assent. Give an assent of faith. So what happened is, once I gave that assent of faith that this is indefectibility, that the church can never run short of the means of salvation, it was easier for me to see through a new lens. And I went into those points. That's a lot of details. I don't think we can go into those. But indefectibility of the church was crucial for me, and with that, I could accept Novis Order. And then there's also another important point that I actually St. Thomas Aquinas discusses this one question. Okay, he says, is Eucharist necessary for salvation? Everyone would just say, yes, but his answer is no. And that is because Eucharist is not necessary in itself. Rather, the reality it contains is unity. Through Eucharist, you become the vine and the branches. That's where those verses where Christ says, I in you, you in me. And then the world will know that I am God. That verse is there in John's Gospel. So what we need is unity. Okay? As opposed, unity is what is needed for your salvation. So if that's the case, I've been putting the cart before the horse. If you're saying TLM is needed at the cost of disunity or schism, then you put the cart before the horse. So you cannot do this at the cost of disunity. So that these 2 points were very crucial,
And also, when I discuss with the radical traditionalists regarding the liturgy, I tell them there are abuses in the Novis Order, and it is committed by certain priests who do not understand the mystery behind the Holy Mass. And of course, there are abuses which can happen even in TLM, because that is also celebrated by a human being, which is a priest.
Yes.
And certain people from Kerala, when they, the right from Kerala, when they discuss with me, I ask them, what about the Sirumalaba Mass? What about the Sirumalagara Mass? Why are you only talking about Novis Order? What about the other 22 rites which are in full union with the Catholic Church? Why are you not talking about those masses?
Yeah. Even now, one of the biggest claims is that a lot of people leave the church because it's Novis Order. But one of the things SSPX does is they never give out. In fact, one of their someone who favors them, he's a popular author. I don't want to mention the name. So he had asked, give me your numbers, like how many priests are there. So it seems roughly around 1,200 priests were ordained, but there are only 700 active priests. And there are a lot of YouTube channels where ex-SSPX priests are running these YouTube channels where they talk about abuses, and they also talk about people who left because of stringent, things that they had within the church. Okay, so there are a lot of people, but I don't want to go into that because I'll be focusing on these difficulties, because we are saying the same thing what they are saying about this, but I don't think that's needed. But like you said, it's been there also, right? So
and I'm ready to stand along with the rat trap who feels that abuses should not happen in the liturgy, especially in the Novis Order. I'm ready to fight with it. But you cannot burn down the house just because some abuse in some parish is happening. You cannot completely say, oh, Novis Order Mass, it is completely abusive and it is invalid or it is harmful and dangerous. You can't make that claim. You can't burn down the whole house just because small places abuses happen. You have to reform it within the church.
Correct. Reform it within the church. That's the point. And moreover, one more additional point to this is, if these things are happening, okay, that has a certain level of crime, that's happening here. But what you do for that is rather more extreme. That you go out, consecrate bishops or attend mass elsewhere. These are bigger crimes. That's a double standard that, that's what I woke up to, these double standards, because my conversion was not reading some theology books as much as seeing the double standards, which I'm actually bringing out with, you see, Protestantism within some of these radical traditionalist movements, the visibility of churches and other indefectibility. These are the points that they say is here, but
they also practice the same thing.
Yeah, they also run the same risks.
To discuss is I want to club fraternal correction and charity. So whenever we have conversations with our trad brothers and sisters, they kind of are very disrespectful to the Pope, to the cardinals, to the bishop. They kind of make disrespectful remarks. And of course the church gives us an opportunity to fraternally correct a priest or a bishop, but then you have to do it with respect, because they are anointed and they are chosen and called by God. You can't, even if they are corrupt or they are sinful, you can't use disrespectful words. And for you that
also in some of these WhatsApp groups, or even if you go into some of these media outlets, traditionalist media outlets, they call our Pope Francis, Bergoglio, okay, even some of the bishops, who are rebelling at this point, they all address Pope in this manner, okay, and that was something extremely difficult. Just naturally, it was difficult for me to take. But I have to say that one of my traditionalist friend, who is into SSPX, he did call out someone who was doing this on the other side, okay, on the liberal side. He said, how dare he does this? We have to address the Pope in the right way. So there are people, who are still mindful of this. But here's where I think this is not happening. That is on this fraternal correction thing. Again, going to Aquinas, he lays this out really well. Okay, he says, like, your hierarchy, you have your hierarchy, okay, and especially the Pope. Okay, if there is some sort of correction that is required, you cannot do it out of justice. This correction can never be done out of justice because he's higher up in the hierarchy. The only way you can do this is out of charity. Okay, so that already changes the rhetoric that you have. You have to be very respectful. That's the only thing that's allowed. The only person who can judge him is God. Okay, and so that thing from Aquinas, see, again here, one of the recommendations that trads have is read Aquinas, and I do that. And that was also one of the ways that I got out of this, because that is called, Aquinas' works are called as the antidote to modernism. But I found out modernism is here, okay, egalitarianism, Protestantism, or let me rephrase it, also found here. Okay, so it is, just to be fair, and especially with Pope Francis, I saw this happening with the bishops. Okay, and democracy is completely against traditionalism. What we see here is they choose their bishops. That is, I'm not saying they ordain or anything of that sort. That happens in their hierarchy as well. They ordain, but they select their mass. They select the priest to whom they submit. Right? They select the magisterium to whom they submit. Now, they might say all sorts of things like, Vatican II is not magisterium and things like that. But still, if you're suspending a judgment here, you're still obeying, or you're going to a mass, okay, where, they do the function, what originally belongs to the church, that is teaching, governing, and sanctifying. These three, the church has to do. The church does this, and we have the duty, to be obedient to these teachings, to be sanctified by the church, and to be governed by the church. And this at the pain of punishment of hell. Okay, this is at the pain of punishment of hell. So it's extremely important that we obey here rather than anywhere else.
Yeah.
I think I
Yeah, and I also want to touch a little bit upon like a fraternal correction. You say like it has to be done with a certain level of charity, and that shows the difference between how Martin Luther approached the abuses that happened in the church at that time, and how Saint Bellarmine or Saint who's the other very famous Saint Ignatius of Loyola. They all stayed within the church and reformed the church. Francis of Assisi, Saint Therese of Avila. So when we talk, I think that's a good demarcation. When you take the route of justice, and I want to prove the church wrong, I want to do this, I want to do that, then it kinds of like they say you have to fight for the church, not fight against the church.
Yeah. So I'm reminded of this verse from St. Francis de Sales. I'm just paraphrasing it. Christ is the only savior of the church. He will not let anyone take that label for themselves. Okay, even the apostles, St. Francis de Sales says that against Protestants. He says even the apostles preserved the tradition. They only dared to do so much. They did not claim to be the savior when the church was going through some issues. Not only during the time of apostles, the other saints as well. Okay, the church saves us. We don't save the church. Imagine how far you have to go to think that we can save the church. Some of these groups that I just mentioned think that they are doing this. Okay, during my conversion, this was another thing. One of the very famous sedevacantists. Okay, I think it's Peter Diamond or his brother, whose name escapes me at this moment. So they debate a lot of Protestants. Here's where that double standard comes up. It's a brief clip. And he's arguing against this Protestant, and he's asking the question: do you believe that the church, which God said the gates of hell will not prevail, during the time of Constantine, it failed? Then the Protestant laughed for a minute, and he said, you know what? You have some followers who are following a monk who think the same thing after 1969 or so. I'm following a monk in the 15th century or 16th century, where he said the same thing. What's the difference? That's what it is. That's the Protestantism that I'm talking about. Okay. So coming back to your point, I think about this fraternal correction, that you need to stay in the church and reform, because if you're not doing that, there's another point that comes up. There is a sort of distrust in the church, that the church, this mission that God sent, God, this is how he says, just like Father sent me, I send you. Okay, and the apostles send these people. There is the sending. That is why the ordinary mission. Okay, there is this ordinary mission. If you distrust this ordinary mission and you are claiming some sort of extraordinary mission, imagine the pride that you have. Right? Yes. Correct. And even in scripture, when Moses was asked, to go and, talk to the Pharaoh.
Speak to Pharaoh.
Yeah, he says, no, they're not going to believe me. Okay? I need some sort of miracles or something. But for us, it's like, he's asking too much. But God does not say no or anything of that. So he immediately says, do this. You know why? Because every time an intruder out of nowhere came and said, I have this mission, they proved it with a miracle. Okay? And I'm always in these groups, they just keep sending Archbishop Lefebvre's documentary. Archbishop Lefebvre, before this incident, the Schismatic Act, where he consecrated the bishops, before that, he was a very holy man. In Africa, he did a lot of missionary work and all that. He lived a very saintly life. His parents were very, very holy, as far as I know. But it doesn't matter. When you say this, right? Like, one of the questions that I ask is, we still have in the church, Novis Order church, Eucharistic miracles. Another point that just opened up. But at the same time, there is this deafening silence of miracles within any of these people. Sedevacantist, Peter Diamond was asked this question: do you have miracles? This extraordinary mission that you have. An SSPX spokesperson asked, there was a debate on Pines with Aquinas. He asked him, do you have miracles? But, the same question can be asked him as well. Okay, but there's deafening silence, but Novis Order Eucharist miracles. So I asked this question in one of the groups. So the answer that was given was this: since abuses happen, just like in black masses, there are these, miracles that happen. It's the same thing that's happening here. Okay, so that might be some sort of explanation for this. But what about the silence here? Where are the miracles? So many people pray to Archbishop Lefebvre. They think he's a saint. Okay. but where are the miracles? Those are genuine personal questions that I have. Those are not theological questions, but as I am journeying, this is something which I had in mind. Yeah.
Good, Ronald. I think we are coming to a close. Okay. I just want you to very briefly share a small brotherly advice to all the people who are now. Sorry, I just repeated. I was away.
So, Ronald, I just want you to share a brotherly advice to all the people who are in the Rat Rat movement, especially in India. Like, as you have journeyed out of it, what suggestion do you have for them to see the fullness of the truth?
Okay, so one thing that is I was very hesitant, and some of these people in traditionalist groups, they know that I'm a very shy person. It's extremely difficult for me to come out and talk. And I'm not doing this to just put them down, because I did go through a certain difficulty as I was exploring some of these things, and this is quite a bit of a temptation in India. Okay, and there is a lot of apologetics works that is required in this area. Okay, it has to be dedicated in this area, and the reason I'm doing this, I'm speaking from my heart here, is not to put them down at all. Because when I used to believe some of these things, I had very good motives. I used to go to these other. I share some of your views on charismatic regarding tongues and other things, and in fact, that's what started my journey here, because I saw a lot of double standards there, and I came here. So when I was here, I truly believed, we need to save the church. We need to save the church and things like that. So I'm not attributing any sort of false motive there. But what I would say is, like you said, these few things that if they can do, they can see for themselves these things. One is, their own recommendation is St. Thomas Aquinas, an antidote to modernism. That was one of the things, that made me, if you're reading it very neutrally, objectively, you will put all of these under the lens, and you will see that there are some inconsistencies. Okay, and Vatican I documents. Okay, one of these people, one of their biggest sales pitches, that great apostasy in the Bible, and there is something called the operation of error. This is one of the things they use with almost everyone. That this operation of God will send an operation of error to believe lying. And about great apostasy, they believe the church went that way, they lost their way. Okay, but this was exactly the point. But if you check any traditional document, the way this a great apostasy or the Antichrist movement happens is through schism. And schism happens only when you split from the church. Schism is the one, which gives this great apostasy, which brings up this great apostasy. The more we take away the powers of the Pope, the more schisms happen. You're enabling that. You check any traditional Catholic book on Antichrist or eschatology, this is the only explanation. Nowhere does it say the church itself, will go into schism or apostasy. These were the words from Archbishop Lefebvre, that the church is in apostasy, the church is schism, and still Vatican Catholic, that is the Sedevacantist group, they also claim the same thing. Okay, so I would say just read your traditional, take your own recommendations, read those traditional books. They are very well versed in a part of sacramental theology, that is TLM. Everything regarding TLM they know. But what about ecclesiology? Okay, it's the study of the church, and these other, or just broadly, even St. Thomas Aquinas. Don't read all the difficult parts, but the ones about church. And basically, even traditional Catholic, don't read. If you don't want to read this, don't read. But I'm saying it's still consistent with what we have in traditional Catholicism. I think these are the two things that I really want to, to land on the part of the clergy. We need, because if we don't cut it at the roots, we know what's happening in Europe and West. It'll spread like wildfire. Okay, and this is a hopeful situation, because without knowing any of this, just explaining some of these things, I have people who have converted to this side, or at least on certain matters they've changed. Sedevacantists have said, okay, at least now we believe it's not invalid, whether it's licit or illicit. That's where they are. Some of these people that I'm interacting. So it's possible, and if you can do that,